今欲しいなもと言っている。
Metric tons of just stuff. It's not a good saxophone. I'm gonna warn you, it's not a good one. But it was free.
So just so Colbert doesn't have to buy one, we're gonna use it for wood as well.
Are you taking that this week?
Next to us.
Oh, duh.
I mean,
Everybody
that
has
doesn't.
two.
I did everything backwards. Took brass 2 first and the others 3 first. But I took strings 1 and 2. Also, Kieran, thanks for your help on the work we did last night.
All right, so good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm going to start today by doing something a little out of order, maybe a little out of the ordinary. I have not the entire piece, but I have a few pages cut back of a Chopin Nocturne that is going to be, we're going to watch this, or we're going to listen to it on YouTube. It's Perlin, you know, he's a professional violinist. Well, he's one of the greatest and was, I don't know if he still is, but he's one of the top 5 violinists in the entire world. And, well, this is a recording back in the 1980s. And he played this Chopin Nocturne with the accompanist. And this is somewhere, I would imagine somewhere in the White House, because when you watch the video, you see Ronald Reagan and his wife, Nancy Reagan. And, well, anyways, I want to just listen to a portion of this piece, the beginning and then also the very end. And I want you to pay especially close attention to the very last chord when we get to the last chord of this piece. So let's just take a few minutes and do that, and then we'll look at the homework handout that you have for today. So a little change of pace. Now again, this isn't the entire piece of music. It's just the first page and the last page, just to save a little time. So let's start at the beginning here.
A transcription by Nathan Milstein.
you turn you probably already turned your sheet over, and I'll get to where it starts to the last page that you have. And again, I think it's the last chord of the piece is the one that I really want you to pay close attention to. And here we are at the last page. One of the best picker guitars I've heard.
Was that an A6? Was that an A6 I mean?
An A6?
No, regular.
Oh, you mean like the actual pitch?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't look at that really closely, but yeah, definitely an octave higher than what's written there. And then even the second to last system, there's some of those pitches that are supposed to be played an octave higher than written there. I don't know. I don't know how better to illustrate the modal mixture of the borrowing of the major triad in the minor. It's the only one that's borrowed when you're in minor, the picker D30. It sure has a nice effect, and I always like to use that example, especially the end here, because, well, you know, when you have one of the top 5 violinist players in the world, and you can listen to that, I'd say take every opportunity to do so. All right. So after that start, you know, this is one of the final days that we're going to spend on modal mixture. And I did want to give you guys the opportunity to, now I know you don't have to be finished with the homework handout yet, because that's not officially due until Monday. But I did want to give you the opportunity to see if there were any questions about anything on the homework handout. Excuse me, especially the front side, where you have the part rating to do, and you also have the 3-tier or the 3-row pivot chord chart to fill out. We'll do another 3-row pivot chord chart today, because that's what you need to have in order to kind of see how to modulate using a modally mixed or borrowed chord. Modally mixed or borrowed chord. While you get that out, I would like to play the top portion here, the part rating portion. Even if you don't have it all part written, that's fine. It's in the key of F major, and you'll find that there should be 2 borrowed chords, or 2 modally mixed chords in that part rating example at the top of the page. Okay, so this is an F major. See if you can hear the 2 borrowed chords there in the middle measure, or the second measure, I should say. Where's one of the borrowed chords for sure?
The minor 4.
Well, tell me what beat and what measure?
Before the second measure.
Before the second measure? Absolutely. Where's another one? Let's look at the bass note.
First beat measure 4.
First beat of measure 2. First beat of measure 2. Yep. It's got a D flat. Now, what do you expect that that E flat in the bass is in a beat 3 of measure 1? What do you think that's for? It's not for a borrowed chord. What's the only other kind of...
Secondary.
Yeah, it's for a secondary chord. That's the only other kind of chromatic chord we know. Right, secondary chords like a 5 of something or a 7 of something. That's what that E flat in the bass for of the first measure is for. And then the 2 borrowed chords, they are in the second measure. One is right on the downbeat of measure 2 with the D flat in the bass, and the other one is on beat 4, as Tristan said, in the same measure. Okay? Questions about that, or questions about the pivot chord chart down below? Remember, those of you that have already done the pivot, well, even if you haven't, remember in the middle row, what musical symbol do you have to write in front of the capital 3, 6, and 7 chords? Yes, you have to write flat capital 3, flat capital 6, and flat capital 7 in the middle row only. Because if those chords were used or chosen as a pivot chord, they would be borrowed chords. They would be borrowed chords in the key, yes.
This can be a silly question, but can you tell me like how you memorize? Is there like a specific reason why it's always those chords that are lower?
It's always those chords that are lowered because when you pull them from the parallel minor key, their roots are always going to be a half step lower than the root of a regular scale degree 3, 6, and 7 in a major key. And so when the root of a chord is a half step below or a half step outside of the key signature, you have to precede the Roman numeral with a flat. Let's see if I can, is there a way I can maybe illustrate that? So let me put up a C natural minor scale. Maybe that will help. Okay. Now, if I am in C major, and I want to borrow either the 3 chord, the 6 chord, or the 7 chord that's built on te, or the subtonic. If I want to borrow any of those chords and use them in C major, you see how the root of a 3 chord is going to be E flat. And the normal root of a 3 chord in C major is E natural. Okay? So I can't just write this, and this is supposed to be capital C, C major. Because if I wrote that, you might think it's an E, G sharp, B triad with a root of E, the normal root in this key. But I want to make it clear that it's not E, G sharp, B. So if I do this, this tells me that the root of the 3 chord is actually a half step outside, below, or outside the key. So instead of E, the root of this chord is E flat. And then the capital 3 means a major triad on E flat. So I would always read these symbols as figure out the root of the chord first. Right? Because if I ask you to spell a 5-7 of flat 3 in a key, then what I would want you to do is I would want you to calculate the root of this chord first. And again, let's say we're in the key of C major. What is the root of a flat 3 chord in C major? It's borrowed from C minor, so it's E what? Say E flat.
E flat.
E flat. Maybe you did, but I didn't hear it. Sorry. Okay. Then what is the dominant pitch of E flat? In other words, what's a perfect fifth above E flat?
E flat.
A B flat. So what you would be spelling is you'd be spelling a B flat, D, F, A flat, or a B flat major minor 7th chord. Okay. Likewise, if I'm in C major and I want to borrow a 6th chord from C minor, the root of the 6th chord is A flat. So I can't just write this, because then it would be confusing. Someone might think I mean an A natural C sharp E major triad, but I don't. I want it to be on A flat, so I put the flat in front of the Roman numeral, and that means that the root of the chord is now lower, a half step below what you would normally expect. Instead of A natural, the root of this chord is A flat. And it's a major triad to be built and spelled and heard on A flat. A flat. Does that help clarify that? That's what the flat in front of the Roman numeral means. It means the root of that chord has been altered or taken a little bit outside of the key signature of the key in which it's found. Yeah. Okay, good. So yeah, I just wanted to remind you about the flats in front of the 3, 6, and 7 in your middle row of your pivot chord chart. There was something else I was going to say and now I forgot. So it must not be that important. We're going to go through later today, we're going to go through that example out of the workbook one more time to reinforce the modulation, see a modulation that uses a modally mixed or a borrowed chord, and hopefully that will help you do your analysis of the Schubert passage on the back of your handout. Because this passage starts in a key and it modulates to a distantly related key using a modally mixed pivot chord. That is, the pivot chord is borrowed in the first key, but it's diatonic in the second key. Okay. All right, let's see, I want to keep getting a little bit behind schedule here, but does anyone want to, well, let me just double check one thing. No, I think that's good enough. Did I tell you last class that I was going to give you a brief quiz in class today?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go ahead and do that now. It's just spelling and adding accidentals to borrowed chords. All you need is a pencil. When you do this quiz, when you get this quiz, see if you can focus really closely and intently. Pay attention and see if you can double check your calculations so that you get the right accidentals, the right chord roots, and everything for these borrowed chords. Okay? So we'll take about 10 minutes to do this. First of all, add a key signature to the top 3, and then spell the chord, and that'll give you the right accidental key. bottom section of this quiz, you want to put accidentals in chords that are either borrowed chords or secondary chords. Secondary chords and borrowed chords will require at least one accidental, maybe more, but maybe not. So let's take one more minute on this quiz. Well, the seventh of the chord really needs to be in relation to the root of the chord. Whether it's a major minor seventh or a major major seventh, or diminished seventh, that kind of thing. So it really is not dependent on the key, it's just dependent on the quality of the chord, the type of chord it should be. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And for this one, it must be, yeah. No, I would put DD. Yeah. Yeah. All right, let me come around and collect this. I hope you did your best. Check your work, pay attention to all the details. Kind of sneaky sometimes, but thank you. ones? I'll take that as a yes. All right, so what I'd like to do is spend just a few minutes, hopefully not too long, spend a few minutes taking a look at that workbook example you had, since I didn't quite feel like I had enough time to cover it last class. And then in the last 10 minutes or so, well, we'll see what we have. I'd like to go through an exercise on how to write your own progression that modulates using a modally mixed or borrowed pivot chord. If you have your workbook with you, open up to page 212. I'll try to show mine, well, I have to play it first, and then maybe I can show mine on the screen up above. Can't do it at the same, can't do them both at the same time. Not in this class. So I'm going to play the Schumann example right there on page 212 for you again. And remember, last class we had talked about how the passage starts in E major, and in the last two bars, only the last two bars, it modulates to a distantly related key of B minor, the minor dominant, B minor. Okay, so let's hear that one more time.
1C7.
Let's switch here, so I hope you can see my score on the screen. One thing that's really important about this passage to understand is that we have not modulated until we pass or get through measure 11. And the reason we know that is because, well, we just heard it, I didn't make a big point of it, but measure 11 is a clear authentic cadence in the home key of E. We have 5/7 and we have 1. And the second chord in measure 11 here, this sounds like tonic. It sounds like a 1, like we have reached home. It sounds like a 1 in the key of E. It does not sound like a chord in another key. Okay? So last class, what I was trying to explain was, well, how do you find the pivot chord? How do you find the borrowed pivot chord or the modulation in a passage like this? Well, I think what I would do is, again, I would really depend and rely heavily on the cadences. We know that there's a strong cadence in E, and we know that that's a 1 in E. We also can look ahead and we can find and say that this is a cadence in B minor. So by the time we get to the last measure of the example, we know we're in B minor. That means, by process of elimination, right, that the modulation must be somewhere between this chord and the last chord. Makes sense, right? Okay, so what I did in this case is I started I started analyzing backwards in B minor. I know that this final chord is in B minor, so I said, okay, can I analyze the chord prior to that in B minor? And it turns out, yeah, I can. It's an F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, E chord with an A sharp in the bass, so that fits neatly as a 5/6/5 in B minor. And then I said, well, let me keep going. Can I analyze the prior chord still in B minor? And I said, yeah, I can. It's A sharp, C sharp, E, G. With a C sharp in the bass, that makes it a 7 full diminished 6/5. It fits diatonically, normally, nicely in the key of B. Then I went back even another chord, which lasts for these first two beats of the measure. Can I analyze that chord in B? And the answer is yes, I can. It's E, G natural, B. We talked about the signals between the two keys. The signals I have listed right over here. To get from E major to B minor, I have G natural, D natural, and A sharp. Okay. So a chord with G natural, that's going to fit in the key of B. And it functions as a minor 4, just a regular 4 chord in B minor, no problem. But if I go back one chord further and there's an E major triad, can I analyze that chord in the key of B minor? No, E major chords do not fit in B minor. You can't just say they're capital 4s. Do we ever borrow a capital 4 from a major key and use it in a minor key? No. What's the only major chord we borrow and use in a minor key? Yeah, the tonic, the major tonic, that's right. So we can't like try to force it and say, well, this could be a capital major 4 in B minor. No, there is no such animal. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to think, well, this chord was in E major. Let's start going forward and see how many of these chords I can analyze in E major without too much trouble. And the very first chord I come to is an E minor triad. Before, I did not have a way to analyze that in a major key. But now I know that it can just be considered a borrowed minor chord from the parallel minor. It's a borrowed tonic chord from E minor. And yes, you can have a minor 1 in a major key. Now we know we can. And so that turns out to be the pivot chord. It's borrowed in the first key. It's a minor 1 in E major. At the same time, it functions diatonically perfectly in the new key of B as a 4. And everything from the 4 on, I can analyze nice and neatly in B minor. Okay. So I guess part of the way I decided where the modulation was is I used a combination of things. I said, well, I know I'm still in E major here because of the cadence. I know I'm in B minor here because of the cadence. Therefore, the modulation must be somewhere in between. I started analyzing backwards in the old key until I got into some trouble or some problems and I couldn't fit the chords in the key. I started analyzing forward from the old key until I couldn't analyze any more in that key. And right where they intersect is where I came up with a solution and said, oh, that could be a pivot chord. It's just that it's chromatic or borrowed in the first key and diatonic in the second key. So I used kind of a combination of, and I don't want to say it's common sense, but I used some logical steps that I could figure out and that I could be sure to make sense of so that I didn't miss the modulation. Right there, sandwiched in the middle. And then I should also point out that when you have a pivot chord, like we were learning last semester, and say your pivot chord is a 4 in one key and a 2 in the other key, this is called a regular plain diatonic pivot chord because both of the chords fit perfectly in their respective keys. But when you have a borrowed chord as one of the chords in the modulation, like we do up here, this is technically, this whole pivot chord is technically called a chromatic pivot chord. Why would it be called a chromatic pivot chord? Well, because one of the chords doesn't fit exactly in the key where that it's setting in. In fact, this chord has a G natural, which is a chromatic pitch in E. So I don't know, when everything fits nicely and neatly hunky-dory in a pivot chord, we just call that your regular standard plain diatonic pivot chord. But when one of the chords is chromatic to one of the keys, we can say that this pivot chord is called a chromatic pivot chord. So it's a little bit different than the standard pivot chords we were dealing with last semester. It just uses a chord that's chromatic in one of the keys, that's all. Let me know if you, questions. Let me pause here for questions. Because sometimes I don't know if what I'm saying, if it just is like a little bit too much technical jargon and it's going way over everyone's head, or if this is actually making sense and you see, oh, that's how I can analyze that modulation. Or yes, I do understand that. Does anyone have any questions? Are you lost? No.
Okay, so that one's called, so how do you rephrase this? So we have 3 modulations now, a chromatic pivot chord, a chromatic modulation chord, and then a normal diatonic pivot chord.
Okay, close. It's a diatonic regular pivot chord. It's a chromatic pivot chord, and the other one is just a chromatic modulation. It's not a chord.
Got it.
Remember the chromatic modulation? We won't see a lot of that anymore, but that's where you have 3 notes that move in chromatic fashion and you have to circle them in the music.
Yeah.
So that's not really a chord necessarily. It's just that you would have, for instance, you would have maybe C, and you'd have C sharp, and you'd have D. and you might be modulating from A minor to the key of D major. And what you do is you circle these, because this could be like a 1/6 in A minor, that's the bass note, by the way. And then you just draw a line and you start analyzing in the new key. You remember that from last semester? So this could be like the bass of a 5/6 in D, and this could be the bass of a 1 chord in D. It's not really like a pivot chord that you're overlapping or you're hinging or linking or pivoting around. These are just 3 separate chromatic pitches. And then you stop analyzing in the old key and you start analyzing in the new key. With these, you do have a chord that functions in both, so there's a little bit of overlap. And this smooths the modulation out. So yeah, does that help clarify? Good. Other questions? You feel okay? Good? All right. So then let's take the last 10 minutes of class and let's talk about how we could write our own progression with Roman numerals that modulates using a modally mixed or a borrowed pivot chord. And the example or illustration I want to show you is going to take us, we're going to pretend that we need to modulate from C major to the key of E flat major. Are those two keys closely related on the circle of fifth? No, they're not. They differ, their key signatures differ by more than one accidental. C major, as you know, has no flats, no sharp. E flat major has 3 flats. If two keys are distantly related or foreign, like these are we guaranteed to get a regular normal diatonic pivot chord? The answer is no, we're not guaranteed to. Only when keys are closely related are we guaranteed to be able to find a normal pivot chord. So I'm going to write out a pivot chord chart for these two keys and see what I come up with. I hope you remember the quality or the type of Roman numerals in major is major 1, minor 2, minor 3, major 4, major 5, minor 6, and diminished 7. And if I want to see if there's any normal, natural potential pivot chords between these two keys, where would I put the capital 1 under for E flat? The minor 3, right? Because this is an E root and this has to be some kind of E root. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, minor 6, and diminished 7. Let's take a look at the qualities of each column. Do I have any potential pivot chords? No, because in no column here are the Roman numerals of the same type. Can you see over the stage? Sorry. Okay. But there are no pivot chords as of right now because in none of these vertical columns do we have any Roman numerals that are the exact same type. Does that mean, again, we throw our pencil down and say, I give up, I have no idea, this must be impossible to modulate? You say no, because you know that we have now let modal mixture or borrowed chords enter into the modulation equation. Okay? And I'm going to write out the chords for a key right in the middle, and the chords for these keys, the key in the middle, are going to get me a lot closer to be able to find a pivot chord to the destination key of E flat. So what key am I going to write the chords out for in the middle? C minor, yeah, not E flat minor. C minor, the parallel minor mode of the original key. Is C minor closely related to E flat major? Yeah, in fact, they're so closely related they share the same key signature. Okay, so the chords in minor, minor 1, diminished 2, major 3, minor 4, minor 5, major 6, and major 7. And because I'm not forgetting that I'm really trying to modulate from C major to E flat major, if I were to borrow one of these 3 6s or 7s, the correct Roman numeral that would be, it would be in the major, C major key would be flat 3, flat 6, or flat 7. Because it would be a borrowed chord in major. All right, now, let's disregard the top row. Kind of block that out. Now you're comparing just the columns, the Roman numerals in the columns in the bottom 2 rows. Do I have any potential pivot chords?
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, aren't all of them potential pivot chords now? Okay, so I can't cross any out, because they're all legal. Even though some might be poor or lousy, they're all possible. But out of these rows down in, or these columns, I should say, in the bottom two rows, which one might you circle as a pretty good smooth pivot chord? Okay, that one I would accept. Yeah, that's a very good one. Is there another one that might be just as good?
The minor 4 is 2.
Yeah, this one? So when it's a tie, just pick one. Just circle one. I'm gonna just circle that one. This is saying that if I'm in C major, all I have to do is use a borrowed 4 chord, a minor 4 chord, in C major, and that's going to propel me and allow me to get pushed into E flat major. That's what that's saying. So let's go ahead and write our progression now, a progression, using that pivot chord. And this is a chromatic pivot chord because the top chord is going to be borrowed and only mixed in the whole key, in the whole first key. So let's put the pivot chord about halfway through our progression. So I'm going to put a minor 4 here. And that's going to be in C major, because it's borrowed from C minor. And let's see here. Put a minor 2 there. Now I could go to finish out the key, put some chords to establish the new key. I could really go 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. I could. Let's say we're a little bit graduated past that basic stuff. Let's say I wanted you to use a secondary chord somewhere in this progression. Well, what we could do is we could use maybe then a 5, 6, 5, a 5. And then go to 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. Okay? So 5, 6, 5. It's okay to go to potential 6, 4. Potential 6, 4 to 5 is basically like 5. That's not out of the ordinary. And then I gotta just choose a few chords to place in C major to establish that key. And I'd say a minimum of 4 chords in each key. So one thing that I did is well, start with, by the way, so always start with 1 and end with 1, please. Because when you modulate, that'll make the strongest case for establishing the key. Your ears will thank you for it. So I did a 1, I did a P6-4, then I did a 6, and then I went to the borrowed chord, the 4 chord. Okay, so let me see if I can play this progression from C major to the distantly related key of E flat major using a borrowed chord as part of the pivot. So let's establish C major. We have at the beginning, then we have, let's see, how do I want to do this? Maybe we'll do it this way. Change the inversion of my pivot chord to make it smoother in the bass. I'm going to do this. How's that? Just because I can see what's happening now in the piano. There's the 5, 6, 5, 5. What do you think? Was that, I don't think that was too jarring. It's not like I yanked you out of C major and said, here, you must go into and adjust into this distantly related key of E flat major. It's not really like that. If you think of the bass line for these chords, C, B natural, A flat, it's just kind of like going down by step. and then the bass of this is A natural, and then B flat, and B flat, and E flat. You can, trust me, I mean, you could think it out, figure it out, but, does anyone have any questions about how to not only find a modally mixed pivot chord, but then place it in the middle of a progression and write the Roman numeral scale modulation?
Just out of curiosity, would you ever, like, I guess, want or need to put like a bar chord, like to modulate to the 7 key?
Oh, to put a borrowed chord in here?
Yeah.
You could. It's a little bit more difficult for me to decipher when I'm grading your papers, because then I don't know if you purposely did that or if you made a mistake.
Okay.
But yeah, you could. I would probably just steer clear of that and just keep the borrowed chord right here, because you really want to establish the new key, so just use things that fit pretty well in the new key. But yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Now, as we get ready to go here, the Schubert analysis on the back side of your homework for Monday, that modulates and uses a modally mixed pivot chord. The opening key for that piece is A flat major. The new and final key, the second key, is C flat major. Are those two keys closely related? Absolutely not. C flat major has 7 flats. A flat major has 4 flats. And I've given you some hints on the bottom of that analysis to help you find, hopefully, where the modally mixed pivot chord is. Okay, I don't want to keep any longer. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend. I'll come right back. I got to stop this.